Brother, when I was a child, I have 4 brothers, my parents would bribe us to do things that we didn't like to do. They would reward us for giving us things, getting past those things that we didn't want to have happen. For example, if I had to go to the doctor to have a wart removed, well, they got to put the Bernie thing on it, and it hurts real bad. So they'll give us a candy bar. You can pick any candy bar you want if you go to the doctor's office and get this thing burned off. So, okay. So we get rewarded. We get our candy bar. I like Butterfinger back then. I still do, but I had better teeth back then. So anyways, there was a time that I remember specifically, an event that I was not bold enough to do, and that was to go up on the diving board at the pool. They had free swimming lessons at the high school that I eventually would go to, but as a small kid, that water was scary. And my dad would go underneath the diving pool, and he would stand there by the board. So all I had to do was jump in, but I wouldn't do it. So he offered me a candy bar. No way. No. 2. I'm listening. 2 candy bars. No. Okay, 3. I'll give you 3 candy bars if you will jump off the diving board. So I remember getting up there, and that's as far as I got. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't jump off the diving board. I even still think to this day, I could have had those 3 candy bars, but I didn't get them because I didn't jump. Sometimes in this life, we have these obstacles that we don't want to go past. And the Bible reading program and a conversation I was having with Garrett kind of spurred this on. What kind of giants do we face today? The Israelites, they saw these giants, and they didn't want to move past them. They were afraid. And this happens to all of us in different degrees. But let's jump into the Israelite example. Let's go through the scriptures, read a little bit more of their details, and find out how there's parallels to what they go through with us. The title of the message is Facing Your Giants. So let's turn to, not Deuteronomy this time, which is more of a summary. Let's turn to Numbers, where we get more of the story. Numbers chapter 13. And I'd like to read verses 1 and 2 before we skip forward. Numbers 13, verse 1, it says, "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." So the men that were sent out were leaders. They were proven, trusted men, somebody that when they came back, people would be confident to take their word, and one from each tribe, so that all the tribes could feel they had a good representation. But let's jump down to verse 17. We're not going to read all their names, although there are some interesting ones. Verse 17, "So Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan. And he said to them, Go up this way into the south, go up to the mountains, see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether the forests there, or whether there are forests there or not, be of good courage. And bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes." In this section, we read that they were given 3 directives. They were go observe, see what the land is like. And they had many different details, but go see what the land is like. That's directive number 1. 2 was to be courageous. There would be a reason they need to be courageous. And 3, bring back fruit. They're to bring back proof, physical proof, maybe a reminder for those particular spies when they were given their report. God knew that what they would find. The people, of course, would be encouraged to see the good fruit, right? But as we know, those spies, maybe they needed to be reminded about what the land was like. We know the story, but let's continue reading on. Verse 21. "So they went out and spied the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath, And they went up through the south and came to Hebron. Hyman, Sheshai, Talmai, the descendants of Anak were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zon in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it between two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs. The place was called the valley of Eshcol because of the cluster where the men of Israel cut down there. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. So as they returned, we see that they did follow through with the objectives, but not all of the objectives. They did spy out the land, number one, and they did return with fruit. But as we'll read here, they were not all courageous. They didn't follow that second directive. Now let's continue now in verse 26. So they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel to the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them, to all the congregations, and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told them and said, "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Ammonites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea along the banks of the Jordan." So they have a good report of the land, and then they have some bad news too. I think sometimes this parallels our lives too. We see what the good opportunity might bring, but then there's a downside, or there's a challenge that's there, and we may not want to rise to see that challenge. It might be too difficult for us. We might think that it would be too difficult for us. Because our life isn't always sunshine and roses. We have the good and we have the difficult too. So that's what they reported. There's good and bad news, guys. Verse 30. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." Well, Caleb followed objective number 2. He was courageous. Verse 31, but the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." So these spies, they refuted Caleb, and they may have been correct in that physically those descendants, those giants that they saw, were bigger and stronger than they were physically. That's how they were viewing things. So maybe they weren't wrong in their report, but they certainly didn't follow objective number 2, to be courageous. And remember who had sent them in there. Only Caleb, and as we know, Joshua, followed through with that directive. Continue to read in verse 1 of chapter 14. Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. You know, in this circumstances of life that we're in now, crying isn't the problem. Our reaction of fear isn't abnormal. We have human emotions, and we react to things. And feeling scared of something is not in itself a problem. But what fear can do to us, if we allow it to be uncontrolled, that can cause the problem. Like many have said in movie lines and books, the idea of courage is not that you aren't afraid, it's that you have trepidation or you have fear and you still move forward. You are brave to go through with whatever that difficult thing is. God wasn't asking them not to be afraid of the giants. He was telling them, go in and I will be with you. But let's see what their reaction was. First, we're going to read the reaction of Joshua and Caleb, though. So let's jump down to verse 6. Chapter 14, verse 6. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. They spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, "The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land." It is good. They had proof. They brought back the fruit. They had seen it too. They were respectable men like the others. It is a good land. You can't get around that. Verse 8. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. It's a very insightful admission that Joshua would put the word "if" in here, because we don't always know how the future is going to play out. Even though God gives us marching orders to move forward in this life, that doesn't mean we know everything is going to go great. There's going to be challenges. And so Joshua, he says, if the Lord is with us. That's a good thought. Even if we're not exactly sure how it's going to turn out, it doesn't mean we can't move forward knowing God will be with us. We don't know exactly how it's going to go, but we know he's going to be with us, and we have confidence. But let's read verse 9. They encourage them, "Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." They try to encourage their brethren here, and they try to encourage them not to rebel, because rebellion, it can be a consequence of having uncontrolled fear. Uncontrolled fear can cause several different things. And my dad understood fear better than I did. And there were times where he had mentioned to me that my shyness could lead to rebellion, which I thought was kind of crazy. And I didn't really agree with him for a long time on that. But you can be too afraid to move forward, and it can cause you to go back against what your conviction is or who your authority is, and to not do it. And in this case, the Israelites were afraid. And they warned them, don't rebel. Don't be uncontrolled in your fear. This is a consequence that can happen. But it's not the only consequence that comes from uncontrolled fear. Now let's read the example of the Israelites' reaction. So let's go to Numbers 14, verse 2 this time. It says, "All the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, 'If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in the wilderness.'" They were complaining. And this is a symptom of uncontrolled fear. If we don't work through it, if we don't go to God in faith and ask him for help, and we just let it control us, we can start complaining. And of course, other things can cause us to start complaining too, but this is a symptom of fear, this complaining. But that's not the only thing they did. Verse 3. They said, "Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" Uncontrolled fear can lead to accusations. They were accusing God of bringing their wives and children to be victims. I wouldn't want to say that to God. That's pretty dangerous in my opinion, but that's where their fear was bringing them. They accused God that he was doing this to them. They were out of control with their fear. Verse 4. "So they said to one another, 'Let us select a leader and return to Egypt.'" Here's the rebellion. This is what Joshua and Caleb jumped up and they tore their clothes. Don't rebel. Don't go away from God. He's the one that's leading us. He's our boss. He's our God. He's got us through these times. Don't rebel against him. Don't go against what he's told you to do. But uncontrolled fear, it can cause you to rebel. And worse off is verse 10. Let's read verse 10. "And all the congregations said to stone them with stones." Uncontrolled fear can lead to murder. So when we have fear in our lives and we don't take it to God and we let it consume us and control us, we have 4 different things that we see it causes. It can cause us to complain. It can cause us to accuse other people for issues that are going on. It can cause rebellion against authority. And it can even cause murder. Now, we're not murderers in this room, but remember the spiritual side that Jesus encourages us, that we are not to hate one another. And we know that there is character assassination. When we say bad things about somebody else, we can be killing their reputation. And that can be done motivated by fear of not wanting to overcome a problem. And that's a very bad thing. We don't want to be guilty of these things. But this is where uncontrolled fear can get us. When we don't want to face our giants and we want to turn back, it can cause major issues. And it's not just the Israelites we have as an example of this in the Bible. I'd like to turn to another one. This time I'd like to turn to Saul. Saul was an example of somebody who had uncontrolled fear. He was just a man like the rest of us. But so are the heroes in the Bible. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, we actually read through this last week. We had a message from Mr. Chance where he talked about the correct approach, this is in my terms, how we approach God. This time I'd like to consider it from Saul's perspective, what was going on through his mind. So Saul, 1 Samuel chapter 13, we have this example where there's the attack against the Philistines. Jonathan leads an attack with several thousand troops. Saul announces that they made this attack, and so now everybody knows. And then the Philistines gather an army, a huge army, 30,000 chariots, according to the scripture, 6,000 horses, and people like the sand of the sea. There is a huge response. And let's see what the people were thinking as this was happening. Verse 6, 1 Samuel 13, verse 6. When the men of Israel saw that they were in danger, for the people were distressed, the people hid in caves and thickets, in rocks and holes and in pits. And some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. So they even left the promised land. They're like, we'll go on the other side and hang out for a while. As for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him, trembling. There was fear, not just with the people, but Saul also, as we'll see, he was a fearful person. Verse 8. Then he waited 7 days according to the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal. The people were scattered from him. So he's having people leave. There's a huge army gathering. He's waiting and waiting and waiting. When Samuel is going to be there, Samuel doesn't show up. Verse 9. So Saul said, bring a burnt offering, peace offerings from here to me, and he offered the burnt offering. Now it happened, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, thus that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him. And Samuel said, what have you done? Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattered from me, that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash. You have this Saul. He was concerned because what did he see? He saw physically. He saw the armies gathering. He saw the giants gathering against them. He was afraid, and his reaction led him to rebel against the authority, rebel against God's rules. Verse 12 says, then I said, the Philistines will not come down on me at Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever, but now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Saul's fear, it led to rebellion. He saw things through his physical eyes, which is very hard for us not to do. We all see through our physical eyes, but are we processing that with the Holy Spirit that God gave us, with an understanding to know that God is with us, and the armies that are against us, those giants that are out there, they don't matter as much as it feels like they would if we're only thinking physically. But Saul, he didn't control the fear. He was a fearful man, and we can see that throughout his life. Let's look at some other examples. Let's turn to chapter 15. 1 Samuel chapter 15, we know that God was wanting to take the Amalekites and take them out for what they had done to Israel. They were receiving punishment. And Saul went after him and he attacked him, but he didn't do exactly the way God told him to do it. Let's see in verse 13 here. Samuel went to Saul, this is after the event, and Saul said to him, "Blessed are you of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. I did it." Verse 14, but Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" And Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." Then Samuel said to Saul, "Be quiet, and I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night." He said to him, "Speak on." So Samuel said, "When you were little in your own eyes, were you not head of the tribes of Israel, and did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, 'Go, utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed.' Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord?" He's called out. Samuel, directed by God, calls Saul out for not following his direction. Let's see what Saul's response was. Verse 20. And Saul said to Samuel, "But I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalekite. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." So Saul here, he accuses the people. Fear that's not controlled can lead to accusations. Verse 22. Then Samuel said, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than that of the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." So as we read earlier, not only was he accusing other people, but he was rebelling because he was a fearful person. Let's read this in verse 24. Then Saul said to Samuel, "I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandments of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice." Saul admits his fear. He had an uncontrolled fear, and he didn't take it to God. He didn't go to Samuel and ask for help. "I am afraid of the people." Instead, he caved. He caved. He rebelled against God's word because he was afraid of the people. They were his giants in this case. He was afraid of that confrontation with them. Of course, that's not the only thing that fear led Saul to do. Let's read in chapter 18 here. 1 Samuel chapter 18. As we know, David defeats Goliath, and he starts to become a hero, and Saul uses him, and he's doing great. The people love him. So 1 Samuel 18, verse 5. So David went out, and whenever Saul sent him, and behaved wisely, and Saul set him over the men of war, he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Now it happened, as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced, and said, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s." Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s. To me they have ascribed but thousands. Now what more can he have than the kingdom?" So here Saul is complaining. He's complaining about David. And as we read with the Israelites, when you have a fear, that uncontrolled fear, it can cause you to complain. It can cause you to accuse. It can cause you to rebel. But not only that, it also can lead to murder. Let's keep reading here, starting verse 9. So Saul eyed David from that day forward, And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand, as at other times. There was a spear in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall with it. But David escaped his presence twice. So here we have him trying to kill David. He wasn't successful. They attempted murder. And in verse 12, now Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him. Saul had uncontrolled fear, and he displays it through his life, and he displays these same 4 symptoms that we see the Israelites follow through with. Fear leads to bad things. And that's something that as we go through our lives, we can reflect on and say, what good things have happened because of the fear that I had not moving forward when maybe I should have. Of course, we don't only have the bad examples. Let's look at some good examples. Let's look at David, because David, of course, was the opposite of Saul's example. So let's turn to chapter 17 of 1 Samuel. We're not very far. Verse 11. The Philistines, of course, they had the descendants of Anak on their side, or in this case, Goliath, and several of his family members. He had several brothers, I believe an uncle, that were giants as well and renowned. They were soldiers. They were feared. So 1 Samuel 17, let's read verse 11. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. We've read that before. They had to face their giants. They didn't want to. They were afraid. Let's jump down to verse 22. Verse 22, and David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, came and greeted his brothers. Now as he talked with them, there was the champion Goliath of Gath, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words, so David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. Now again, these men of war, these soldiers, all of these soldiers that had fought battles were afraid. They saw things physically. What does David see? Verse 25. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who's come up? Surely he's come up to defy Israel, and it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches. We have his daughter, and give his father's house exemption in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel, or the shame from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Notice David's mindset. Notice how he saw, particularly when he describes the Philistine. He says, this uncircumcised Philistine. As we know, circumcision was an outward sign of your commitment, your covenant to God as your leader, the Yahweh God, that particular one. So what did David see? He saw the servant of somebody else, not our God. How did he see himself and all those that he was standing with? As army, an army of the living God. He had a spiritual mindset. That's what he saw. He saw the bad guy not with our God, and us. We are with God. He saw life through a spiritual lens. He was not afraid. He was not afraid. And of course, we don't have to be either, because we know who our God is. That he's on our side, and he's the biggest there is. If God is on our side, what do we have to fear? Except that feeling, knowing that uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. But God is on our side, so we can move forward. David wasn't afraid like the rest of them. Let's drop down to verse 30. Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. And when the words which David spoke were heard, They reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. Now, this example we have from David is encouragement to the other soldiers. He didn't just say this one time. He was going around to the troops and trying to help remind them who their God was, which side they were on. They were armies of the living God. And so he went around repeating this for them to boost them up. Get a grip. God is on your side. And so Saul sent for David. Bring this guy to me. Verse 32. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. David was ready to help. He was encouraging the brethren. He said, I'll help stop this guy. I'll help stop this spread of fear. I'll go out and do it. Verse 33. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. You can't physically do it, David. Just like the Israelites when they're looking at the giants going, we can't do this. They are way too strong. There's too many. Their castles are too big. We can't do it. They saw through the physical. That's what Saul saw. He saw the physical. You can't do it, David. You just can't do it. You're just a little kid. Verse 34. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and your Lord be with you. David says to Saul, I've been trained by God. God gives us steps in our lives that help us to get stronger and get trained and ready for the next event in our lives, because God is building that character in us, that godly character. And that takes time, and that takes trials at some point. And in this case, David knew that he had been prepared. He wasn't afraid because God had been training him, and he was ready. And he gives God the credit for saving him from those beasts, because why would a boy have any chance against a lion or a bear, just like he wouldn't against a giant? But God had prepared him. Verse 38, so Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail, and David fastened the sword to his armor. He tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said, Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. And we see here that David's confidence, it didn't come from physical weapons or armor. You know, he put on all that stuff, but that wasn't his confidence. No, I don't even need this stuff. I don't need the physical things in this life to keep me from the trials that are ahead, to face my giants. I need God, and he's with me. He knew it. He had confidence in that spiritual, and so can we. Verse 40, then he took his staff in his hand. He chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. There was a message I heard some time ago that Goliath had 4 brothers, or maybe it was 4 brothers, 3 brothers and an uncle that are noted in the Bible. We have history of these other giants related to Goliath. And so he suggested, the gentleman speaking, that maybe he grabbed 1 stone for each of them, thinking, I'm going to take them all out, which I think is an expression of faith and a possibility. But I also like to consider the possibility that David was preparing because he didn't know exactly what it would take to defeat this giant. Just like when we go through life, we don't know exactly what it's going to be like. But we can have confidence to know God is with us and he can help us through, but maybe we prepare the best we can because we don't know exactly how it's going to go. What if it took him 5 stones to get to Goliath? I don't know. I don't know what was going through David's head. But I do know that despite David's confidence, he was still human, and he still had nerves. He was going to fight a giant, but he had God on his side. He had God on his side. Verse 41. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David. And the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword, with a spear, with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you, take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. You see, David had confidence. He had confidence in God, and that is greater than the power of fear. Faith is greater than the power of fear, and he wanted to defeat him and spread that confidence to all Israel, that all men would know that there is a God in Israel, to remind them God is on your side. We don't need to be afraid. So he was ready to step out there. Verse 47, Then all the assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. We don't have to worry about the physical. We don't have to worry about the physical challenges that will happen. We don't have to have that sword and that spear physically. We need to look through the spiritual lens. We need to have the faith to overcome that fear. And we can, just like David did. We don't understand the ways of God necessarily. His ways are so much higher than ours because we are constantly looking at the physical. We live in the physical. We're rating the physical, going, no, we can't do this. But God doesn't need the physical to be even odds to win. And we're proven this time and time again in the Bible. With the story of the Israelites in Egypt, Israelites in the Promised Land, with David and Goliath, God doesn't need even physical odds. He's God. But we constantly trip on that physical fear because we're physical. He knows that it's hard. He knows that it's hard. But David wrote in Psalm 23, verse 4, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That's why, because we know God is with us. How can we conquer fear? Be with God. See his salvation in our own life, because faith is greater than fear. Now, faith is not ignorance of what can come. We know sometimes that things are going to be uncomfortable or difficult. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 24. Proverbs chapter 24. We're going to read verses 15 and 16. Proverbs 24, 15. Do not lie in wait, O wicked man, against the dwelling of the righteous. Do not plunder his resting place. Verse 16. For a righteous man may fall 7 times and rise again, but the wicked shall fall by calamity. We can take away from this that, yeah, we know sometimes we're going to fall down. Sometimes we will get knocked down. But the righteous man has got God on his side, and he can get back up. There's a movie quote that I really like. It's from Rocky Balboa. But he gives this really inspiring speech to his son. And I'm just going to read a little part of it. But it's a really encouraging message. He says, it ain't about how hard you're hit. It's about how you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. My faith is understanding that, yeah, sometimes we're going to have those hard moments. But we can keep moving forward because God is with us. God is our strength, and he will get us through. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 18 and 19, they're told to go into the land, that they're soldiers. I'm just going to turn there. I don't paraphrase it wrong. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 18 and 19. And you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may go in and possess the good land of which the Lord swore to your fathers, to cast out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has spoken. We're going into a fight. Fights aren't easy. They're hard. It's exhausting. Somebody is going against you. But we're Christian soldiers. So we're told to prepare for that fight. And we don't know every detail of the fight that's going to happen, except we win. But that doesn't mean we're not going to take our licks. We don't know how it will end. And we have examples of that in the Bible. Let's go to Daniel chapter 3. See the example of Daniel's friends, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. They trusted God. They were put before a fiery furnace and said, if you will not rebel against God, in that case, they would have had to submit to their uncontrolled fear. If they would bow down, they could spare their physical lives. Otherwise, they would surely die, because which one of us can stand in a fire and not die? But let's see what they said. Chapter 3, we'll just read verse 16 through 18. Here's their Babylonian name. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, if you're going to throw us in, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. So they had this outcome that was unknown, in the sense that they didn't know if God would save them. But what they did know is that God was with them. And they did know that he would not prevail. The king Nebuchadnezzar, he wasn't going to prevail against them, even if he did kill him, because they had a bigger hope than that. They had a bigger directive than that, and they wouldn't submit to their fear. But I'm sure that they were afraid of going into a burning fiery furnace. That's pretty scary. They had this outcome that's unknown, and they did not cave to their fear because they had faith. And faith is greater than fear. Let's turn to Mark. Let's turn to an outcome that we know was known, because in that instance, they had an unknown circumstance. They didn't know what was going to happen. But in Mark chapter 14, we know Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. Mark chapter 14. We'll read starting in verse 34. Mark 14, verse 34. Then he, Jesus, said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch. So he went a little further, fell on the ground, and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. In this case, Jesus knew what was coming. And he didn't cave to fear, but he went to God and asked for help. Verse 37. Then he came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. Jesus understood. When we see things through a physical lens, it can be easy to cave. It can be easy to submit to the fear. And he encouraged his disciples, but he practiced this because he was physical too. And what did he do? He went and prayed. He went and prayed to God for faith, for strength, And he set in his mind that he was going to do what he had to do. He knew who his master was. And so he committed to that, despite what was surely going to happen. And sometimes in our lives, we do know the outcome. And we know the outcome's not favorable. But we move forward in faith. We understand that the end is worth it. We understand who our master is, the loving God of the universe. And the physical is not it. In the book of Numbers, we read the Israelites, that they were fearful, and they didn't take their fear to God. Instead, they viewed things physically. They forgot, they refused to recall all the things that God had done for them. And they complained. They complained against the servants. They accused God of sending them to a place that they were going to die in. They rebelled against what he said. And they even attempted to kill his servants. All because of the giants. Brethren, there are going to be giant opponents that we have in this life. They're going to be there in front of us. Big, scary obstacles or events, adversaries that we do not want to face. We're physical men too. But brethren, these aren't insurmountable. Like the enemy would like us to believe, it doesn't matter how big that giant is, if God is on our side. I like to read a psalm that David wrote in Psalm 27. It explains his mindset and the one that we ourselves can have. Psalm 27. This is his expression, and it's one that we also can have and match as children of God. Psalm 27, verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked came against me to eat up my flesh, my enemies and foes, they stumbled and fell. Though an army should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this I will be confident. One thing I have desired of the Lord, him that I will seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret place of his tabernacle he shall hide me. He shall set me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me. Therefore I will offer sacrifices of joy in his tabernacle. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy also upon me and answer me. When you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not leave me nor forsake me. O God of my salvation, when my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take care of me. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in a smooth path because of my enemies. Do not deliver me to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such as breathe out violence. I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Brethren, we need to take our fear to God. Take it to him, and don't forget the things that he's already done for us, the things that he's done for his servants, and the things that he's done for us in our lives in remembering when we have to face our giants. Keep in mind the spiritual perspective, not the physical, because the physical obstacle we will be able to get through. We are his Christian soldiers. So let us all, each one of us, remember to fear only God, to have courage, to march forward and face our giants. while holding God's hand.